Family Farm, and we're sharing our Seed to Plate special where we're walking you from seeding plants and getting them started in the garden all the way through to harvest and then preparing them in the kitchen. And this week's crop is tomatoes. We're getting late in the summer here. Summer is almost officially coming to an end, and we're definitely experiencing it. There's a chill in the air, and the mornings are definitely real cool, which has been good in terms of forcing some crops to start ripening. And tomatoes are one of those that when cold air starts hitting them this time of year, they start ripening even faster, and it seems like they're producing more prolifically. So these tomatoes that I'm next to right here are our bumblebee cherry tomatoes. We grow probably a dozen different types of tomatoes, and these are some of our classics. A really nice cherry tomato that's got fun coloring and is just really sweet and delicious. The way that we've grown these are indeterminate tomatoes. And tomatoes, there's determinate and indeterminates. And generally speaking, indeterminates are the types of tomatoes that vine and grow and are producing throughout the whole season. Determinants tend to grow a little bit more like a bush, and they don't vine as much. And then they oftentimes will produce kind of in waves, or maybe even just one time a year. They'll set a bunch of fruit all at once. And so indeterminates is probably what we grow more of. And the way that we've trellised them in here is just with a single leader. So just one stem that's growing up, and then we're only allowing the fruit to grow on that one stem. We're not allowing any branches to come off. And then we just trellis it up a string up to the top of the hoop house, which you can see it's up over my head now. So these plants we started indoors early in the spring in seed trays, and then we transplanted them into bigger, about 6-inch diameter pots. And then from there, once they were a good 1 to 2 foot tall, we transplanted them out here on May 1st into the ground. And then there's a little bit of work, especially this year, just keeping frost protection, keeping them covered, so that they didn't experience any damage from the cold weather in the spring. But then once they really started taking off and we started getting warmer weather, they're really resilient plants. One of the biggest challenges that we had was wind, but having them in the hoop house helped a little bit with that this season. And so as you can see, the plants grow quite large, and these indeterminate varieties produce throughout the year. And one of the nice things about these cherry tomatoes that vine up, and as they grow, they're just continuously producing fruit. And as it ripens, it's really easy to harvest. All we have to do is come in and simply kind of pop the fruit right off just like that. There are some varieties of tomatoes, some of our larger varieties like our Brandywines, where when we get to harvesting, we trellis them the same way. They grow very similarly, but the fruit is so large, and the stem that's connecting the fruit to the plant is much stronger than what these cherry tomatoes are. So it's good to have some clippers or scissors with you just to trim those ones off. We've had some Brandywines this year that are up around 3 pounds in weight, so they get really large, really juicy, and those are some of our favorites as well, which you've seen in a few of our videos that we've done using tomatoes in recipes. And so that's a really brief primer on how we're growing tomatoes. Tomatoes are one of those crops where there's just a lot of different thoughts and different strategies for how you can manage them. This year, we feel good about what we've gotten out of our tomatoes, but we've also had several challenges. We've had a few that have developed kind of a blight or a fungus that really took back their growth and limited our production on them. But that's why we plant a wide variety, and especially our cherry tomatoes have been really healthy and done really well, and have been resilient through the cold spring that we had and then the hot days of summer. There's some things that we may try differently in the future, including grafting tomatoes. That's one of the ways growing them at this high density is the best way to prevent disease. And the way that you do that is you start 2 seedlings, one with the rootstock that you want, that's going to be a disease-resistant rootstock, and then the other with the fruit that you want, the type of fruit that you want. And then when they're very young still, before you've transplanted them or anything, you actually cut the 2 plants at the main stem, and then graft them together. And as that graft heals, you now have the disease resistance of the rootstock and then the type of fruit that you want with the plant as it grows. And so that's something we may experiment with in the future. Again, there's so many different ways that you can trellis tomatoes. There's so many different ways that you can grow them. This high density planting with our indeterminates and our cherries has worked really well for us, and it's something that we'll continue doing. but we'll continue modifying so that we can get the highest quality and the greatest yield possible out of our tomato plants. So from here, we'll take you in, and Emily's actually going to show you a little bit about what we do to save our seeds. And in that section, you'll get to actually see what the seeds look like and discuss a little bit about what types of plants we grow and why we choose the varieties that we do. And then we'll show you a quick preparation of how we like to use some tomatoes for meals in the kitchen. Thanks a lot.
So as Steve mentioned, we are going to show you a little bit about how to save seeds. We don't necessarily save seeds on all of our crops, but for some of the crops it really makes a lot of sense because seeds actually retain some of that knowledge from generation to generation and continue to adapt to their particular climate. So as we have chosen our seeds initially, we really try to choose seeds that will thrive in this particular climate. So we're at a higher altitude, we're at about 6,300 feet right here above sea level, and we do have a very short growing season. So our last frost day is actually around Memorial Day, and our first frost day is around Labor Day. So we haven't actually had our first frost yet, but we're very close to it. We've been in the 30s all this week. And so we really need to choose seeds that are adapted to that climate. And by saving our own seeds year after year, these plants will continue to just adapt and to get even better at thriving in this particular climate. And so when you're actually going to choose your seeds to save, you want to make sure you choose the very best plant and the very best fruit from that particular plant. So if we have a plant that's struggling a little, we don't want to choose the seed from that plant to save. You want to really select the best quality to carry on the traits that you want in that future generation. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to be saving your seeds, you need to choose varieties that are open-pollinated. So all of our plants that we have here, all of our tomatoes, are heirloom varieties that are open-pollinated, which means that they are not a hybrid. Because if you're trying to save the seed from a hybrid, you actually don't know which traits are going to carry on in that next generation. And so we want to choose varieties that are going to continue to look like this bumblebee tomato. And so so you go ahead and you choose the very best fruit from your very best plant of that variety, and you really only need one or two, because within this one tomato we'll have 20 plus seeds to choose from for next year. And so tomatoes are also unique in that you don't just take the seed and dry it like you might do with a bean or a pea. Instead, you actually have to ferment it because there is a gel casing around it that essentially prevents the seed from sprouting while it's still inside the fruit. I'm sure you may have experienced that at one point in your life. There's a little sprout coming out of your tomato. But for the most part, that gel casing prevents that from happening. So we actually need to ferment it, which allows it to break down that gel casing before we can actually dry and save that seed for a future year. So we'll take you inside so you can actually see what that process looks like. All in all, it takes about a week to save the seeds from a tomato, and it's not very labor intensive. It literally will take you a minute or two each day, but you do need to check on it and stir it throughout that entire process. So just make sure you choose a week when you are able to be home, you're not off on vacation, to just check on your seeds that you're saving. All right, I've got some helpers with me here to do our seed saving for our tomatoes. So you'll need to simply wash them and then cut them in half so that you expose the seeds here. And then you'll just simply scrape the seeds and the surrounding pulp into your jar. You can use a spoon to do this, or I think it's easier just to use your fingers. You'll get all the pulp, all the seeds in. And you want to do each variety separately if you want to know which variety you have in one particular batch. So once you put the pulp inside, you'll actually just put a little bit of water in to cover it. All right. And then you'll want to just put on a little bit of a covering. And so I will often do some cheesecloth, or you can put some plastic wrap as long as you poke some holes in. The fermentation process does need some airflow, so you need to make sure that it can actually access some oxygen here. And then for the next week or so, you'll actually just come and check it every day, perhaps stir it, swirl it a little bit. It generally takes about 4 or 5 days for the fermentation process to really break down that gel casing that's surrounding the seeds. But you don't want it to go too far because then you'll actually see it starting to sprout. So we'll want to make sure we're checking it every day. You'll know it's ready when you see a little bit of white mold forming on the top. Your seeds are still just fine. That's a normal part of the fermentation process. You'll also see seeds beginning to separate. So you'll see the good seeds starting to sink, the bad seeds starting to float. And you might actually even see some little kind of carbonation looking bubbles that again is showing you that that fermentation process is taking place. So we will come back in a few days and we'll show you what it looks like to move on to the next step, to rinse and dry your seeds. Now that it's been 3 or 4 days since we started the seed saving process for our tomatoes, it's time to come do our final rinse and drying so that we can actually store our seeds for next year. So as I mentioned, with tomato seeds in particular, we need to allow time for this fermentation process to occur so that our seeds will actually be viable for next year. So as I mentioned, we're looking for a couple different signs here. So one is that there's this little bit of white mold that starts forming on the top. There's a little bit of these carbonation bubbles that you'll see. So every day I've simply just taken 2 minutes and done a quick little stir or a little swish to check in to see how it's doing. Now it looks like it's ready. So if a seed is viable, it is a little bit heavier, so it will actually sink to the bottom of the container, whereas seeds that are not viable, that you'll not be able to produce a tomato from, will actually float to the top. So during this part of the process, we'll add a little bit of water. We'll give a second for the seeds to separate, and then we'll actually just start pouring off the water on the top, along with any of the seeds that are not viable. And we'll just do that repeatedly until we actually get clear water in here. So we'll start by pouring in a little bit of water, and we'll just give it a minute so that the seeds can kind of sift themselves. And again, the seeds that are viable are the heavier, weightier ones will actually settle on the bottom. So we'll actually just start pouring off some of the liquid here on the top. So you'll see a lot of that little bit of white mold will just go away along with some of the pulp residue. So this was a yellow bumblebee tomato, so we have a lot of yellow in here. So we'll go ahead and just do that process again. We'll add more cold water. We'll give a minute for those seeds to settle. Now it looks like really most of these seeds are going to be viable seeds. Almost all of them are settling on the bottom. So again, we'll just rinse these seeds and pour off the material on the top. And you'll want to continue this process until the water comes clear. So it looks like we'll probably just need to do it perhaps one more time. We'll let that go. And then we'll pour off some of this top layer. Looks like a few little items pouring off here. Some of those seeds, if they're a little bit lighter, they're probably not viable, so we'll let those go ahead and float away. And then we'll actually put it onto a piece of paper to dry. You can use a coffee filter, you could use newspaper. I'm just going to do a paper towel here. And you'll want to separate them out a little bit so that they can dry. And you will want to label it so that you remember which plants you have going here. So again, these are yellow bumblebees. And we'll let it dry here for a few days, and once they are completely dry, just kind of break them apart a little bit and store them in a container in kind of just a cool, dark place. So a basement's usually a pretty good option for storing seeds, and then it will be ready for you to plant next spring. So again, it's not that hard of a process, and there's huge benefits in terms of really being able to select the best tomatoes with the great flavor or the size, whatever characteristics you're looking for, that really get adapted to your own individual microclimate and will just continue to become more vigorous and more productive as the years go by and they get more and more acclimated to your area. So again, good luck with your seed saving. There's a lot of great resources online as well. Seeds Trust is a company that we actually purchased some of our initial tomato seeds from, and they have a great little seed saving guide that gives you tips and suggestions on saving all of your different varieties of seeds, and that would be a great resource as well. So enjoy saving your seeds and eating those tomatoes. Right, and welcome to our preparation portion of our tomato video. I think tomatoes have so many uses. We love just eating them fresh straight out of the garden, making them into a great little salad, whether it's part of a green salad or one of our favorite little Mediterranean salads with cucumbers, tomatoes, red onions, the little olive oil and vinegar, salt and pepper. So many different great ways to cook with tomatoes. So one of the preparations we're going to show today is actually roasting tomatoes. So roasting any fruit or vegetable really intensifies the flavor. And so for this particular dish, we're actually making a rice and egg dish that will have roasted zucchinis and roasted tomatoes. So we'll just cut them into slices. As Steve mentioned in one of our previous videos, a serrated knife is a really great choice when you're cutting up your tomatoes. It just slices through the skin really nicely. And so we'll just do little 1/4 inch slices here to roast them. And we are going to roast these for just about 10 minutes or so. We just want a light little cooking for them. So we'll spread them out on our tray. And then we'll just drizzle with a little bit of olive oil. And then a quick little grind of salt and pepper. It's also a great time to use some herbs, so I will often put a little bit of rosemary or some thyme on here as we're going to cook them. And we'll put it in the oven on 400 degrees for about 10 minutes, and then we'll show you what the final dish looks like here in a moment. All right, and it looks like our dinner is ready. So here we have a mixture of onions, garlic, a little bit of rice, egg, Parmesan cheese, zucchini, and tomatoes. So a delicious warm meal, especially as it's turning a little bit cooler here this fall. It'll be a nice warm dish, still taking advantage of all this great summer produce.